Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, whatever you call it, Get Covered Illinois wants you to know you need to enroll in a health plan before January 31st. Having health insurance is the law. If you don't get coverage, you may have to pay a penalty of $695 or more. Coverage is more affordable than you think. Most people can find monthly premiums for $75 or less. Go to getcoveredillinois.gov or call 866-311-1119 to get free in-person help. That's 866-311-1119. Enroll today.
Blog Talk Radio.
Paranormal Review Radio.
Hello and welcome, everyone. It is Friday night, and you're listening to Paranormal Review Radio, the only radio show without commercials and with more great paranormal talk. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Anthony Agati in New York.
And I'm Luci Liebfried in Chicago. You are listening to one of the highest-rated paranormal radio shows on Blog Talk. No bull, no lies, just a true platform for everyone to share their knowledge and experiences. When searching for the truth, good communication is key. Now, our phone lines are open for questions or stories. The number to call is 661-244-9831. Make sure you press the number 1 to get into the queue. We'll try to get to you as soon as we can. Otherwise, our chat room is open, so you can post any comments or questions there as well. Don't forget to like us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel at Paranormal Review Radio. You'll find more articles, blogs, and full show uploads. And if you have specific questions, comments, or would like to be a guest on the show, email us at paranormal.review@aol.com. Now, sit back, get comfy, and prepare to open your minds. It's time for Paranormal Review Radio.
When people talk about the paranormal in military, you immediately think of Project Blue Book, the Philadelphia experiment, or even the countless alleged stories of time travel within the military and government. But what about the real paranormal stories of ghosts and spirits within the military barracks, or maybe even on the battlefield? Well, not as much, but it does exist, and tonight we will get to hear firsthand of such ghostly haunted accounts directly from a retired Air Force NCO and security officers, Jeremy West. Jeremy has spent his entire life in and around the military. Being born into a military family, Jeremy always wanted to be a man of the uniform, either a soldier or police officer. Jeremy had paranormal experiences since the age of 7, which involved shadow men and very vivid features. These experiences continued while he was stationed all over the country and world. A haunted morgue in Qatar Air Base, a mysterious presence in a munitions storage area in Florida, a haunted watchtower in Saudi Arabia, a growling phenomenon in North Carolina, and a strange object in the sky while on an exercise in Nevada. We are proud to have a guest who has served his country for you and I, and we are proud to have him as our guest tonight. Please help me in welcoming Jeremy West to the show. Hey, Jeremy, welcome to the show. How are you tonight?
Hey, Anthony, how you guys doing?
Great.
Hi, Jeremy.
Awesome. Hey, Lucy, how you doing? It's great to hear from you guys.
You know what? I think I can speak on behalf of Anthony and all of our listeners, and we thank you so much for your service. We're honored to have you on the show. Now, Anthony mentioned a very brief biography in his intro. So can you tell us where you grew up, your family, paranormal beliefs, and what does it mean to be Jeremy West?
Yeah, no problem. Well, I guess I'll go ahead and I'll start from the very beginning here. I grew up, like Anthony said, I did, my dad was in the military. My grandpa was in the military. I had, aunts and uncles that also served as well. And it was pretty much kind of what I've always wanted to do ever since I was a little kid. I dreamt of, being the action hero, that you watch on TV and all that kind of good stuff. My dad we were stationed in Colorado for a while. When people actually ask me, hey, where exactly are you from, I got kind of a hard time kind of answering that question. I'm one of four boys in a family, and I was the middle kid, the one with none of the breaks at all. And pretty much what happened was right after I was born, we moved to Colorado, and I spent about 10 years of my childhood in Colorado, and then my dad got out and everything, and we moved to the Florida Panhandle around Fort Walton Beach, Marietta area, and lived there for a while, lived in Navarre Beach, Florida, and that's pretty much the last place I lived right before I left for the military in 1996. So when somebody asks me, well, where exactly are you from, I just kind of throw it out. Okay, I'm a Florida boy. I'm from the Florida Panhandle, even though I haven't really necessarily spent the majority of my life in a certain location. I've just bounced from all different types of locations, pretty much, ever since I was born. So yeah, if somebody were to ask me where are you from, I tell them I'm from Florida. Colorado was definitely a very unique place to live. We lived in Colorado Springs, just below the Cheyenne Mountains. Got a really great view of the mountain area. That incident that Anthony was talking about, the shadow people, that was pretty much, that happened to me when I was 7 in a house that I lived in Colorado, and that's pretty much the one thing that's actually the freakiest thing that that happened to me that I've experienced thus far. Everything else was pretty much kind of like, holy, what was that, kind of thing. And anyway, just before I get into the military stuff, talking about all the military stuff, I just kind of want to throw this out here. I'm not the guy that is going to come out with all the secrets and all this kind of stuff. I'm not the guy who's going to say, ooh, the aliens are kept here, and I know the secrets to Area 51 and all this. I'm not that guy. I'm sorry if that disappoints anybody. And if people were kind of getting revved up, thinking, oh, this guy's going to tell us what really was going on with Project Blue Book, or this, that, and the other. No, I'm afraid that's not me. I'm not the guy who's gonna spill all the secrets and all that kind of stuff. I'm just a guy who, I was out doing my job and just happened to come across a few things that were just very, some stuff that I had absolutely no explanation for whatsoever. And most of the things that I experienced when I was in the military, I wasn't the only one who actually saw. I wasn't the only person who actually saw these things or experienced these things. Most of the time I was with other security forces members or other military people who saw them with me, and none of us could come up with an explanation for it. So, but anyway, where would you guys like me to start at?
Well, let's start here. Everyone can usually recall with great detail their first paranormal experience. Can you share us what was your first one?
Yeah, okay. Well, we'll go ahead and we'll talk about the shadow person that I saw when I lived in Colorado. We lived in this neighborhood that was pretty close knit, very nice neighborhood in a very nice area. We lived in this house. My older brother and I, we grew up very close. We were roommates pretty much our entire childhood. We're still very, very close. He's actually in the military right now. He's an Air Force chaplain stationed up in North Dakota. And we were very close growing up. My parents knew this. So we moved into this house in Colorado Springs when I was about 5. And my parents kind of wanted to give me and Tom, my older brother, kind of like our own little living space. And so we had a finished basement in this house. The basement basically comprised of the laundry room. You go down the stairs, the laundry room's right there. Had like a living room area, and to the rear of the basement, you had a bedroom and you had a bathroom right next to it. And my brother and I basically lived in this basement. We just played and watched TV and everything in the basement. And, had sleepovers and all that kind of cool stuff. And come up to eat dinner or whatnot, and then go right back down and play in the basement some more. But I never really got a bad feeling about the house that we lived in. Nothing really, before this happened, nothing really had scared me really that often. As a little kid, I really didn't, I really didn't believe in ghosts. I really, as a 7-year-old kid, I didn't think ghosts were real, honestly. I was afraid of 3 things. I was afraid of werewolves, Jason Voorhees, and strangers, That's why I wasn't, I didn't give ghosts a second thought. I really didn't, It was kind of a different time in the 80s. You didn't have all these paranormal shows that are going on that you see on sci-fi and all that kind of stuff. You had the movies and stuff, movies like Poltergeist and all that. But that, I hear a lot of people say that, movies like that scared them to death. And Poltergeist didn't really scare me, like movies about monsters coming out of the woods and all that. That's what scared me. So, and also, this was around the time, I mentioned before that, I was really, one of the biggest fears during the 80s was, talking to strangers, stranger danger and all that kind of stuff. And so I had a real, real big fear of talking to people that I didn't know. The whole thing going on with what happened with Adam Walsh and all that. That was made public, and that was knowledge to us as little kids back then. We all knew what the outcome of that and in other cases were. So yeah, I believe it's fair to say I didn't really give ghost a second thought. And when I saw this thing that actually wasn't really what I was thinking, what I was looking at was, oh, this is a ghost. I had absolutely no explanation for it whatsoever, and I just kind of kept it in the back of my brain. So one night, I was 7 years old, and my brother and I, we were downstairs asleep. We had bunk beds that were up against the wall. I was on the bottom bunk. Tom would be on the top bunk. We kept the hall light on in case one of us had to get up to go use the bathroom in the middle of the night. And we kept this, we had this dresser, this Chester drawer that we used to have pressed up against the wall, and it was right up next to the door. And there was maybe about, I'd say about 2.5, 3 feet of clearance between the dresser and the door. Just enough space to, one adult could stand, right behind it. And I woke up in the middle of the night one night, excuse me, and I happened to be, it was one of those things where I didn't hear a sound or anything like that woke me up. It was just I just kind of came awake kind of thing. And I happened to be, laying on my side facing the door, and I opened my eyes and just kind of looked around the room a little bit and was like, I need to go back to sleep. I got school, it was a school day. And I happened to glance over by the Chester drawer, and I saw this tall, dark figure. Best I can describe it was definitely man-like. Had a bald head. I could make out ears and some broad shoulders. I couldn't make out any facial features or clothing features or anything like that, but it was definitely, it's like a tall, dark shadow of a bald man standing right there by the Chester drawer. And I just was looking at it, and I didn't actually think that I was really awake at the moment. I actually thought, I might be dreaming about this. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm just going to close my eyes and think of something else and maybe possibly dream about something else. So shut my eyes, and I kind of waited a couple of seconds. And that when you're just kind of coming awake and you have your eyes closed and there's light coming in the room and the light's kind of coming through your eyelids. Well, that was kind of what was going on with me, and that's kind of when I kind of realized that I wasn't asleep. I was actually awake, and I actually did see something by the Chester drawer, and I need to open my eyes and double check and see if what I saw was actually there. And this is kind of where it gets a little spooky. I opened my eyes, and this figure, this person, whatever it was, had actually ducked down behind the Chester drawer and was slowly kind of peeking its head back up, kind of raising itself back up, kind of looking up over the dresser at me. And I saw that, and about a second later, it shot right back down behind the chest or drawer, as if like it saw me looking at it and was like, oh gosh, you know, and shot right back down. And that really, really, really spooked me. And I thought, okay, it was kind of a dumb thought, but I thought, okay, well, if I shut my eyes and just pretend like I didn't see it, and, you know, I'm not going to bother it, I'm not going to scream, you know, I'm not going to, you know, yell out or anything like that, I'm not even going to roll over, I'm just going to pretend like I'm asleep, maybe it'll just go away, you know, and shut my eyes again. And I remember just laying there thinking, I don't want to hear it. If it moves, I don't want to hear it at all. And I shut my eyes, and I honestly, I cannot remember a thing after that. I woke up the next morning, and, you know, it was a school day. I was supposed to get up and get ready for school. My brother was coming down from the bed and everything, and he had turned the light on and everything. I got up, and I ran straight over to that little area where I saw this thing standing at. And I'm like doing like my own little forensic investigation, you know, kind of getting down on my hands and knees. I was actually looking for like footprints or any type of indication that somebody had been standing there. You know, I was checking to see if the dresser had moved or anything like that, if the door had moved, if there was anything by the door. Nothing. I found absolutely nothing that was by that dresser at all. And that was honestly the last thing that I saw that was in that house. That always really, really stuck with me, and it just stuck with me. You know, I didn't tell anybody about it. I didn't want to tell my brother about it because I thought he'd laugh at me and stuff. And, you know, my brother he was also into, like, stuff like in the paranormal and all that. I remember, you know, when I was around about that age, he and I actually checked out a book, like one of the first books published about Mothman, and he was reading it to me and all that, and he was talking, you know, we'd read about Sasquatch and the Loch Ness Monster and all that kind of stuff. So he was actually kind of really into that kind of stuff, but I was still really afraid to, you know, tell him, hey, I saw this thing in the room last night. Have you seen anything like, you know, I didn't want to tell him that, and I definitely didn't want to tell my parents because, you know, I didn't know what they would think about it. You know, I didn't want them to think that I was, you know, having trouble or whatnot. And I kind of blew it off to thinking that, okay, I hear all the time about parents telling their kids that, oh, it's just your imagination, it's just your imagination. And I actually honestly told myself, you know, I told myself that, you know, that was probably, you know what, that was probably just your imagination. And but it was one of those things where you think about it and you're just like, you know what, no, that really was there. I remember seeing it, and, you know, I remember seeing it move, and that was kind of what validated it for me that, you know, something was actually there, was the fact that I actually saw it moving. And, you know, trying to, I don't know, avoid me looking at it by, you know, ducking down and all that kind of stuff. And, you know, I gave it some more thought. I even actually asked my parents, hey, have we ever had an incident where somebody broke into our house or something like that? Or, you know, and they were like, no, what are you talking about? And I'm like, okay, no. And I'd asked my brother, you know, well, first of all, I knew that the thing that I was looking at was definitely not my brother because it was way taller than him. And I was I was pretty sure it wasn't my dad because my dad didn't have a complete bald head like this thing that I saw. But, you know, just to be sure, I would ask, you know, I asked my dad or whatnot, I'd be like, hey, did you come down and we're down in the basement, you know, a couple of days ago? And he's, what? Why would I do that? You know, just, you know, my dad never came down to the basement unless, you know, he had like his own little gym that was set down there, and he'd go down there and work out. And that's pretty much the only time we'd ever see him down in the basement. Other than that, you know, my mom would come down every now and then and do laundry or whatever. But other than that, that basement was, you know, pretty much me and my older brothers. So, like I said, I really kept it to myself. I talked to my babysitter. We had a babysitter that came in during the weekdays and whatnot while my mom was at work, and she kind of watched us, you know, after school until my mom got home from work. And I asked her about, it was probably about 2 days after I saw this thing, because I couldn't get it out of my mind. And I asked her, I said, you know, because she had a daughter that was my age. And I asked her, I said, I can't remember her daughter's name, but I said, does she ever see anything in her room at night? And she says, well, yeah, what do you mean? And I was like, like people in her room. And she says, yeah, she sees people in her room all the time. And I'm like, oh, okay. And I'm like, what is that? And she's like, I don't know. I think it's just her imagination, but she says they're actually there. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, that's really weird. And oddly enough, I was actually having a conversation with my mom about this a while ago, and she actually we talked about that house, and I said, Mom, did anything ever weird happen in that house to you? And she says, well, I didn't see anything, but I came home from work one day and was talking to the babysitter, and she said, you boys were either outside or doing something, and she told me how she was inside the kitchen and something about the refrigerator moved on its own, like a couple of it scooted across the floor a couple of inches. And she's like, I didn't think anything of it. I just thought the lady was she had always been kind of weird, so I didn't really think anything of it. And I told her what happened to me, and she was just kind of like, oh, okay, well, why didn't you tell anybody about that? And I was like, I thought you'd think I was crazy or something, or you'd think there was something wrong with me. I just didn't want to, I don't know. I thought I could handle it on my own. It wasn't something that was really traumatizing. It was just kind of one of those things that really kind of stuck with me as a kid, and it was definitely something that I looked for this thing. I would try to stay up as late as I possibly could at night, in the middle of the night, and I would stare in that corner and just wait for this thing to show up again. And it never did.
Well, you know what? I mean, it's really interesting that you said that you didn't tell anybody. I mean, that I think a lot of us, if we've experienced something, we've never said anything about it. It's just recently that everybody starts talking about it. But I wanted to move forward, okay?
Sure.
As I was doing some research for tonight, I did come across a website, and it was called ghostandghouls.com, and it had an article about real ghost stories in the military, and it had a really great line. And the line goes like this: if you want military ghost stories, just ask any military police that have been around for a while. We tend to see really weird crap late at night. Now, coming from the experience that you first mentioned, have you ever thought that you would experience anything like that again, and for that matter, while you were serving in the military?
I actually I hoped that I'd never see anything like that again. I was really kind of like, I wouldn't give it any thought. I would just be kind of like, I hope I never see that again. And I don't know, probably if I ever go into, if I remember looking for a house or whatnot, I'm not going to buy the creepy house. I'm going to buy the the brand new, freshly built house. Well, maybe I'll see something there. I don't know, but I just kind of hoped that I'd never see anything like that again. And honestly, no, I knew I would probably see some extraordinary things in the military. I never thought that I would, see some of the stuff that I saw and experienced some of the stuff that I, was experiencing, and be with other people that were looking at the same thing, that had the same type of reaction that I did, and weren't just blowing it off and saying, oh, that's a satellite, or, oh, that's a, that's whatever. I'd be standing next to somebody and they'd be like, what in the hell is that? And nobody'd have an explanation for it. Just to kind of give you some idea of what I did in the military, I joined the Air Force in 1996. I joined to be a security policeman. It was called security police back then. They changed the name to security forces. And to give you an idea of what that is, I'm sure you're familiar with the Rendlesham Forest incident that happened back in 1980 with RAF Bentwater, Jim Peniston, and all those security personnel that responded to that UFO that was out in Rendlesham Forest.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I did. That's what I did. What Jim Peniston did, that's what I did. It's definitely a true statement when if you want to know anything about what's, any type of paranormal stuff or weird encounters with military personnel, talk to a military policeman, because pretty much, when we see something, it's while we're doing something, while we're out, investigating, something, and we happen to come upon this kind of stuff. And there's nothing really to kind of, I've been sent out on calls, hey, you need to go check out this house. These people are saying that there's some weird stuff going on. And I'd be like, what? And this is on the base, in base installation housing. And a lot of people kind of get the, when they come onto a military base, sometimes people probably wouldn't think, well, military base, it's a really safe place. I'm sure there's probably, it's got its old ghosts and all that, but you won't see anything really terrifying on a military base because it's so secure and all that. And a lot of people kind of get that feeling. I always got that feeling. And no, no, you definitely come across some things that will really freak you out. It's not any different from being in a regular town, being on an installation. I think I'll go ahead and go ahead.
Well, Jeremy, when we first saw your email come through, we were fascinated by the military topic. And the reason why is, because just from our little understanding of it, it's sort of understood that, the men and women of uniform are taught and trained to see things that not every regular, human being can see. Right. Sort of like seeing through the gray to sort out the black and the white. And when we talk about the paranormal, there's a lot of gray. There's a lot of things that are just not understood yet. Has being in the military helped or hindered any past or present paranormal experiences or the research that you've done?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, it's definitely helped out a lot. It kind of gives you that. You don't know what you're coming into. You know that you're coming in to see something or deal with something. You don't exactly know what it is, but you've had past experiences with other things that aren't paranormal that are very malicious, or you're dealing with people in domestic violence and all that kind of stuff. I've been to several houses where I had to deal with that situation, and just dealing with that type of human nature in general really kind of gears you up for some of the stuff that you come across and you're like, wow, okay, you don't tuck tail and run when you see this kind of stuff. You want to try to, as a policeman in general, you want to try to make sense of it. You want to try to say, hey, there's got to be an explanation for this, and then a lot of times you're left with, no, there isn't an explanation for this, or sometimes you are. You're like, okay, well, let's check this out, and let's do a little investigating and find out what we know about this certain situation, and then you'll kind of come across, oh, okay, all right, that's what that really is. But yeah, it definitely really prepares you. The training and all that, it's good training. They when you first join up and you go through basic training, you go through technical training, or or whatever. It definitely you grow up a lot, during that, and you make, the camaraderie between you and your fellow soldiers, your fellow sailors, your fellow airmen, and Marines and all that. That helps out a lot too. That's, you join a new family, and you're not no longer dealing. You're not supposed to be dealing with things alone. You got a family that's actually dealing with it with you. And you got people that you can turn to, when you got questions and you got things that are just kind of leaving you scratching your head. So, kind of what my brothers, it's kind of what my brothers helping a lot of airmen out with these days is, questions about, life in the military, life being away from family, life in, in a war zone, life in, the deployed location. And the more the longer you stay in, the more experiences you get, the more you can kind of look at this stuff and, not be freaked out. I'll tell you the very first thing that was unexplained that I came across in the military, it happened literally only, I'd say, about a month and a half after I'd gotten to my very first duty station in North Carolina. And that freaked me out, like, big time.
Well, Jeremy, one of the interesting things. You know, you mentioned it before. You know, being a child in the '80s and dealing with an experience of the paranormal. You really, you know, you can't talk about it as much, and you know, it wasn't as free and open as it is now because of, you know, the media and television shows and such. And you know, my father was in the Vietnam War, and he served for several years in the Army, and he talks to me about the paranormal. He believes in it. He's always interested in you know, the stories that I may have, or maybe the show topics that I do every week, or anything like that. He's always interested, and he's sort of hinted to me at several conversations about things that may or may, I still don't know, it may or may have happened while he was over at Vietnam, and he just won't talk about it. He won't get into it as much. Was it easy for you to reveal your experiences while still in the military? And had you shared anything with, you know, your fellow mates or your family or anything like that?
Oh, definitely, yeah. You know, like I said, you got that camaraderie, and most of the time, you know, like I said before, most of the time when you see this stuff, you're not alone, or either you're not alone or you see it and somebody else saw it in that area, you know, either prior to you or after, you know, you had, and, you know, you guys can talk about it and that kind of thing. And, you know, unless you got a completely, you know, outrageous, you know, fairy tale type of story, you know, like, you know, a beanstalk, you know, rose up in front of you and you climbed up it and fought a giant and all that kind of stuff, you know, if you've got just a general, you know, experience like, hey, I saw this, what was that? You know, you might come across somebody that will probably be like, yeah, I saw that too, you know, I don't know what that is, you know, and or the sergeant, you know, he's got a story about it, you know, and this, that, and the other, and you talk to him, and, you know, so you're not branded as a freak or anything like that unless you got something that's totally just, you know, completely outrageous that you're just like, okay, well, maybe, you know, why don't we go talk to some people about this and see why you're why you're telling us this. But no, the first thing that I did experience when I was stationed in North Carolina, like I said, that happened to me. I was alone for that. What happened was we had this back gate on the base in North Carolina where I was stationed at, and basically you were for a mid-shift, which is during the night. I started off on mid-shift, and usually the airmen are the ones that they put on the gates as the rookies and all that. And it was either my second or third night being posted at this gate, and for the most part, I'd say between midnight to about 4 a.m., you won't get any traffic coming through, but the gate's still open, and you're still out there. And every now and then you'll get a patrol that'll come by and check on you, make sure you're still awake for one, and make sure that you're not hungry, you don't need to use the bathroom, anything like that. And the way this gate was set up, it had a wooded area on both sides of the gate, really thick wooded area. And I would spend most of my time outside just kind of pacing back and forth, listening to, the radio or whatnot. If I didn't have any traffic, I didn't have any, you're completely out there alone. You're either, inside maybe, looking at your, special instructions that you got, or you're just outside pacing, thinking to yourself, all the time in the world to think during a nice long shift in the middle of the night. And that was pretty much what was going on with me at this particular moment. I was outside, and I started hearing this high-pitched wailing noise coming from the wood line off to my left. And I didn't really think anything of it. I thought, well, it might be somebody having a party or something out in the woods or something like that. And it was just, that's pretty much, the sound was kind of isolated by itself. It was just a really high-pitched sound. And to be honest with you, it sounded like Richard Simmons screaming his head off out in the woods is what it sounded like at first. I'm like,
that's a horrible experience.
Yeah, tell me about it. And it's just, one of those things I was like, what, and I knew that when you went out that gate and you went down the road, it kind of led to kind of a not so good part of town where I was stationed at. So I just figured it might be, some hooligans or something like that out in the woods messing around. But I kept hearing it. It became more and more pronounced. It was just, and it was so, it was completely by itself. It wasn't like accompanied by any other type of sounds or voices or anything like that. And I was just like, I kind of blew it off to like, well, maybe it's an animal or some kind of animal's getting attacked or something like that out in the woods. And go back in the gate shack and, rested in there for a little bit and walked back out again. And this was maybe about, I'd have to say 20, 25 minutes later or so. And I was outside, I had the radio on, and I was, singing to one of my favorite songs, The Wallflowers, One Headlight, it was a big hit back then. And I'm sitting there singing to it, and I heard this grunt coming from the woods. And it kind of, really caught me off guard because I heard it like up over the radio in my own voice and everything. I just kind of stopped dead in my tracks and kind of looked off to my left. And then I heard it again. I heard it for a second time, and it sounded to me. I actually got the impression there was a wild boar or something out there. And I just kind of looked, and I was like, okay, huh? I didn't want to approach the tree line because I thought God knows what'll jump out at me. And I just kind of waited for a second. I turned the radio down, just kind of waited to see if I was going to hear it again. And about the time where I was just going to say, you know what, nothing's there, I'm just going to turn the radio back up, I heard a really low-pitched growl, like a very pronounced growl. And it lasted for maybe about 3 seconds. And that's when I started to get really, really kind of freaked out. And I just kind of looked, and I actually shouted hello out to the woods, and it growled right back at me right after I said hello. And that's when I said, okay, that's it. Got back in the gate shack, locked the gate, took my weapon out, placed it on the table, and just kind of waited. And I got on the radio, and I told my dispatch, hey, I need somebody to come out here. I got something out here I need somebody to check out. And they're like, well, what is it? And I'm like, there's a dog or something out here. And they're like, what? And I'm just like, please send somebody out here. And I was really freaked out because I was like, something's going to come bursting through the tree line and go, crash right through, break this door down. And I'm sitting here with, just a pistol with 30 rounds. It's probably not even going to do anything if it's, a big monster or something like that. And, the patrol sure took its time getting out there. It took about, he didn't get out there until about 30 minutes after, and I'd already started kind of calming down, and he got out, and he was all joking, well, Wes, what do you got out here? You got some kind of, dog man or something? And I was like, I don't know what it is. And I told him what I experienced, and he just kind of was like, okay, well, that's weird. I've never heard anything like that before. And nothing else happened the rest of the night. I avoided kind of going outside until traffic started picking up in the morning time frame, and by then I'd kind of settled down a little bit. The funny thing was probably about a year afterwards, I was talking to this other guy that came, pretty much was stationed there the same time I was. We were rookies together and everything. I was talking to him over a couple of beers one night, and I said, hey, man, you won't believe this. One time we were talking about that particular date, and I said, well, you won't believe this, man. I was out there one time, and I heard growling coming from the woods. And his eyes got really big, and he goes, no way. And I was like, yeah, like a really low-pitched kind of growl. He says, dude, I heard the same thing one night when I was out there. And I was like, really? He's like, yeah, man, I heard like it. He said it sounded like, and I told him, I said, did it sound like kind of like a wild boar or something like that? He says, yeah, something like that. I don't know what the hell it was. He says, but it freaked me out, and I went inside the gate shack and I wouldn't come out, man. It really freaked me out. I was like, oh, okay. So that's kind of what I was talking about with, when you see something, either you see it with somebody else or you talk to somebody else and they saw kind of the same thing.
They kind of like just confirm what you've experienced.
Right,
well, you know what, Jeremy, my family, they're Cherokee, and they're from the reservation in North Carolina. So I'm very aware of legends about things like Bigfoot, Bigfoot-like creatures. There's legends about oversized cats, even lake monsters. With this experience in mind, do you believe that these creatures are real?
Oh, yeah, I absolutely believe that some of the, like the cryptids and all that kind of stuff, I absolutely believe that those are out there. Could this have been one of them? I don't know. I wouldn't put it past it. I have never heard a sound like that before. It didn't sound like any type of animal I had ever heard or ever heard after that. So I don't, I would definitely say, oh, no, it wasn't Bigfoot, or no, it wasn't the Dog Man or anything like that. I wouldn't put it past it, All I know, it was something that was out there, something that knew I was there because it kind of responded to me, and it was unlike anything. It definitely was not a dog. I know that it wasn't a dog. I've never heard a dog make a noise like that before. It really kind of spooked me out, and what made it worse was I was completely by myself, out in an area that, I was kind of isolated from everyone else. I couldn't scream out, and if something that had jumped out of the woods and attacked me, nobody would know it until like the first car pulled up, in the morning for me to check them, and see a dead security guard there. But, oh man. But, So.
Well, Jeremy, one of the other stories that I believe you have is in the Qatar Air Base, and one of the most fascinating things, because Lucy and I do research a lot of times. When people are coming on the show, we sort of like to go a little bit deeper and find out stories to make it a little bit more interesting for ourselves and for our listeners as well. And one of the fascinating things that I found about Doha, Qatar, is that archaeologists had dated human occupation as far back as 50,000 years ago. I mean, that's a really long time.
Cradle of civilization,
Yeah, with that time frame, there's bound to be spirits still lurking around. Can you share that story that you had in Qatar and what your job was and sort of what that paranormal experience was all about?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Now, keep in mind, I deployed 9 times during my career, mostly to the Middle East. I deployed. I went twice to Qatar, twice to Al Dhafra, once to Saudi Arabia, 3 times to Iraq, and 1 time to Bosnia. And Qatar was definitely an interesting. There's something there, because oh man, let me tell you this story. I had this roommate. He's actually a really good buddy of mine still to this day. He's still in the military, as a matter of fact. He cross-trained to be a medic, and we were roommates and all that. Really became really good friends. His name is Nathan. And start off by telling you guys that we were together one night on what's called a fire team. Basically, what a fire team is you get 4 military cops, 1 armored vehicle, a lot of guns. We're basically the guys that you call when something really, really bad is going on. And part of the things that we were responsible for doing was they wanted us. Again, I was on mid shift. Again, I was in the middle of the night. One of the things that they wanted us to do was kind of stay mobile along the baseline perimeter and make sure there was nobody tampering with the perimeter or whatnot. And so you kind of drive back and forth, up and down the perimeter, just kind of waiting for something to happen, and it's you and 3 other guys. At the time, I was actually the fire team leader. I was the guy that was in charge. And usually the leader isn't the guy that's driving. It's usually the 2IC is kind of the second in command is the guy that's driving the vehicle. And that was Nathan. And we were driving along the perimeter one night, in the middle of the night, and we were going extremely slow. We had 2 other guys with us, as I said. They were in the back seat. We had one individual that he was one of those kind of guys that, he definitely believed in, the paranormal and stuff like that. He's told all kinds of stories and was really kind of a spooky individual. In fact, I won't say his name. We'll just call him Spooky. I think that's one of the nicknames we gave him anyway. But he's one of those kind of guys. He believed in like vampires and all kinds of weird stuff, and he listened to opera music and was just really kind of out there. He's one of those kind of guys where you tell him, "Oh, I saw a UFO," and he'd say, "Oh, I was taken aboard a UFO." And you'd be like, "Oh, okay, well, let's go there." next with it, and so he's in the back seat, and we're driving along, and on the perimeter, we're going extremely slow. We're going maybe about 10 miles an hour, and we're driving alongside this chain link fence. And the chain link fence, it's got razor wire and all kinds of stuff that's on it to stop people from barriers and all kinds of stuff. And he and I, Nathan and I, were talking, and we're driving, and all of a sudden I look off to my right, and I see what I thought at first was smoke. And but the funny thing was, it was black smoke, kind of like when you burn a tire, kind of black smoke. And it started kind of coming through the chain link fence. And one thing I noticed about it, and kind of made me think, well, wait a minute, that's not smoke. It was in one solid, complete mass. There wasn't a trail of it coming from it or anything like that. It was one solid, smoke mass that was coming through this chain link fence, passing really, really, really slow right in front of us. And I just looked. It was very big too. You can you hardly see right through it, and it's just really big, and it was just right there, going really slow, moving on its own. Like I said, it had absolutely no trail of smoke behind it or anything like that. And I just looked. I'd never seen anything like that before. And I didn't say anything. I just kind of looked at it and was waiting to see if somebody else would say something. And Nathan actually said at first Nathan's the kind of guy. He starts every sentence off with the word "dude." So, dude. He's like, "What the hell is that?" And I looked at him. I said, "Dude, I didn't want to say anything at first, but I don't know what is that smoke?" And he's like, "It's by itself. There's no way that's smoke." He's like, "That's completely by itself." And we're just watching this thing just pass right past us, in our headlights and everything. And he slowed down about that point. He slowed down to maybe about 2 or 3 miles an hour. We're just kind of creeping along, and we just watched this thing. He shined, he had one of those big old mag lights. He shined his mag light on it, and it really kind of made us feel very uneasy, just kind of looking at this thing. And I happened to lean back over my shoulder, and I looked back at Spooky, and I said, "Hey, man," I said, "you see this thing?" And he says, "Yeah." He says, "Do me a favor, pull up to it. I want to talk to it." He says, "I want to get out and talk to it." And Nathan and I, we just looked at each other and we're like, no, we're not doing that. No, and he was pretty persistent about it. No, Sarge, please pull over. I want to talk to it. And it's getting away from us. And I'm like, that's a good thing, We just kind of kept going, and we lost sight of it in the dark, and we didn't see it again. And oh man, we got off work, and that's all we talked about. We sat down and had a couple of beers, and we're talking about it with all the other guys that were on the shift with us, and everybody else was just like, wow, that's something. I don't know what that is, but a little bit later into that same tour, Nathan had come to me one day and he said, "Hey, while I was on patrol one night, I found out where the morgue is." And I was like, "Oh, okay." "No." And he's like, "Well, we got to go check it out." He says, "It's off." It was actually located in the very back end of the base, where it's kind of like an exclusion area where nobody really goes in unless you have official business, to go. There was a couple connexes back there and storage units and all that. It was really kind of off the beaten path. There was no roads or anything like that. You had to kind of, you needed a 4-wheel drive to get out to that location. And I says, "Well, we got to definitely check it out before we leave." And I was like, "All right, well, whatever." So one morning, we're getting close to where we were going to do our shift change, and he calls me over the radio and he tells me to meet with him out at this location. And I had somebody else with me, and so did he. And we met up, and basically the morgue was a very well insulated tent, is what it was. And it was unsecure. It was open. We opened the door and walk in, and we had flashlights and everything. Didn't have any power, but the AC, the HVAC was still blowing in it. There were no bodies at all inside, located in, at that time anyway. I guess this was the place where, where we had people that were coming back from other places, and then they put them maybe temporarily, and then, they put them on another aircraft or whatnot. But at the time, there were no bodies in there at all when we walked in. You walk into this place, and I know you guys have probably felt this type of feeling before. One of those feelings where you walk into somewhere and something immediately is telling you, get out. You are not supposed to be here. Get out. And I just had that really times. Just an awful feeling. Just an absolute awful feeling. I was just kind of walking. We were only in there for maybe about 5 to 7 minutes or so, and I couldn't shake that feeling. It was just really, extremely foreboding, and I just couldn't, I was like, I can't be here or something, and I kept feeling, it felt like something was like just looming over your shoulder the entire time. And Nathan had a camera with him. He started snapping pictures inside the morgue. And one of the very last pictures that he took, he turned, we were all kind of in the corner of the building, or inside the tent, and he actually turned toward the entrance of the morgue. And right next to the entrance, there's a window that's basically got, it's a clear plastic for the actual window, but it had the tent flap was down, so you could actually, you couldn't see out the window. And he took a picture like right to that location, and he's like, okay, well, let's get out of here. And we left, and like, I'm not going back to that place. That's just I couldn't handle being that feeling that I got. I've been in some really, really bad locations where it's just an awful place to be, and that literally was one of the places that I definitely, it was the fact that I felt unwelcome, but it was also the fact that I really felt like you're unwelcome because you're not supposed to be here, kind of thing. This is not a spectacle. This is not something for you to be, you're not here on a tour. You need to get out, that kind of feeling. And I told him, I said, we're not going back to that location. He says, yeah, no, I agree with you. We're not going back. And I was like, all right. A couple of days later, he and I were sitting in our room, just kind of packing things up and whatnot. Like I said, it was getting to the point where our tour was about to be up. He was on his computer, and he was going through some pictures, and he said, hey, man, you got to look at this. And I was like, what is it? And he says, well, these are the pictures from the morgue. He says, I didn't really notice it at first, but he pulls this picture up, the same picture that he took of the doorway right there with the window. And he says, man, just look at this and tell me if you see anything weird. And I was like, all right. And I'm looking at it, and I didn't really see it at first. I said, he goes, let me zoom in a little bit. And he zoomed in on the window, and there was a face in the window, like clear as day. And like my blood just like chilled when I saw that. And it wasn't like a face, like a reflection of one of us. First of all, I know it wasn't a reflection of one of us because we weren't standing across from it where it would actually cast off a reflection of one of us. We were all kind of huddled in the corner. It wasn't like a normal sized human head kind of face. It was like it took up a lot of the window kind of face. And it was very pronounced, very just, there was really no mistaking it. You looked at it and you're like, yeah, that's a face. And you need to like X out of that or something because I don't want to look at that anymore, kind of thing. And we went around and told people, hey, look, just don't go to the morgue. There's not a good reason for you to be there. Just don't go there trying to look at things or explore or anything like that. Just leave it alone. And we kind of left it at that. So, yeah, Qatar is definitely one of those places that it's got a lot of history to it, and you're there for a while, and you see a lot of that history and a lot of the culture, and it's been through some heavy times, and it's something that you really never kind of forget. It's always with you. See a lot
Jeremy,
of shooting stars. Yeah.
One thing I want to ask you, Jeremy, these experiences that you had in Qatar, I mean, I'm assuming since then you've had experiences here in the States. Did they feel different? Did it have a different feeling? Do you think that these spirits are different than what we have here? I mean, could it be the religious beliefs make the experiences different?
No, you know what? No. Well, I didn't feel like they were any kind of different. To me, the unexplained is kind of the unexplained. I didn't really think of it as okay. Well, I'm dealing with maybe this type of entity or this type of phenomenon, and it's different from as far as the culture and all that goes. It's different. I don't know. It's kind of hard to describe. You get a different feeling when you walk into like an abandoned hut in the desert, and that's kind of creepy. You get a different feeling definitely from being in one of those than in being in like a stateside haunted house in like Massachusetts or something like that. It's very different. You do feel like, okay, something is here. It's probably not necessarily what I would experience in like say like the Lizzie Borden house or something like that. It's something else.
Right.
I didn't give it a whole lot of thought. To me, the unexplained is just kind of the unexplained, and yeah, I kind of left it at that. You try to do a little, little investigating, little researching, find out, hey, is this place, notorious for anything, and it's not. It's a little bit more vague when you're overseas than it is when you're stateside. When you're stateside, there's almost a story for every place. If you experience something weird in a house stateside, you go down to the library or local historian or whatnot, and you almost find out immediately what possibly could be going on in that house. And why? What the history of it was. You go into these areas, these shot up buildings or whatever, doing clearing, and you got that feeling, or you hear something, or you see a shadow run past you real quick, and you don't know if that was a bad guy or somebody running away from you, or maybe something unexplained. And there's really, you try to do some type of research about it, and there's so much that happened over there that it literally could be anything, really.
Well, Jeremy, one thing I want to ask. Somebody in the chat room, Kevin, is mentioned elementals. Are you familiar with that concept? Could these things that you experience, could they fall along those lines?
You know what? I'm not too familiar with elementals. I think I've heard the termination before. I'm not too familiar with elementals. Could you maybe educate me on that a little bit? I'm not.
An elemental is more like it's not so much a spirit of a person or a thing. It's more like something from nature. It's like maybe a natural consciousness or being. When you talk about Celtic history, legends, they tend to talk about elementals. They're things that come from nature, and they're not always good. Sometimes they can be negative. And a lot of what you're describing could fall under that category. So it's possible that you may have come and encountered with something that could be called an elemental.
Well, definitely that smoke thing that I saw. I would, in regards to the elementals and all that. Coming from nature, I would definitely see it. That the smoke phenomenon, that their cloud phenomenon that we saw, that definitely probably could qualify as something like that. Yeah. But
Jeremy,
for filling me in on that. I haven't done too much research or heard anything about elementals, but thank you for that. Anyway, I'm sorry.
No, one of the things that as you're talking and you're sharing your stories with us, there's a couple of stories that you hadn't mentioned yet. Like the incident in Florida and in Saudi Arabia, but it as you're talking, I don't know, it popped into my head, the thought and the idea that the experience that you had at an early age, I think you had said you were 7 years old, do you think that maybe whatever it was that was there, that shadow figure, that bald shadow figure that may have been watching you or spying on you, it's sort of, shadow men are sort of... theories have been that they're lookers, they're watchers, they're just there to observe you, not so much to haunt or or to do anything demonic or anything like that. But do you think that maybe the experience that you had at an early age, whatever that was, has followed you to all of these other different areas within your career? Because you're obviously not seeking out, like you're not going specifically to a haunted location and doing a paranormal investigation. You're working, you're doing your job, you're going to all these different locations, and you seem to be having these weird experiences. Do you think that there's a sort of correlation, a connection between what happened at a young age to all these experiences that you've had thus far?
Are you asking if I think that this was the same thing pretty much just manifesting itself in a different type of perspective to me?
Yeah.
Well, I wouldn't dismiss that. I wouldn't say, no, that was definitely something else. I won't lie, it definitely looked like something else. But, no, that could also be a possibility that this is, it's the same thing, just kind of, showing me it's a different type of face every time, just saying, hey, I'm still here, just so you know, hey, and I'd be like, oh okay, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, possibility. I wouldn't write that off at all. I definitely think that was a possibility. I will say this: it definitely, seeing a cloud figure go past you and seeing a shadow man in your room, it definitely gives you kind of a different feeling, especially with the huge age gap, and the maturity gap and all that kind of stuff. Because when you're a little kid seeing something like that, you feel helpless and you feel like, oh gosh, I don't know what to do. When you're an adult, when you're in the military, when you're heavily armed and you're with a bunch of guys that are also heavily armed, and you kind of get a different feeling about that. You're like, oh gosh, no, we're okay. Yeah, we're okay. You definitely get a different feeling about it, but no, I wouldn't. I wouldn't write that off. It could be something like that.
Well, with everything that you know so far about life and your experiences that you've had with the sort of unexplained, all these different unexplained experiences, and putting religion aside for a minute, what do you believe happens when we die? Where do you think we go, and what happens to us?
Well, I honestly couldn't answer that question without putting religion aside. Well, you know what? I'll answer that question, and I'll put religion aside, Anthony, and I'll talk about more like relationship, and that's the relationship that I have. I don't like the word religion. I actually don't. I think of myself as having a relationship with God as opposed to, I'm a religious type of person or whatnot. I do believe very firmly that this is not it. You do, pass on. You do go on to something else. And I don't want to trample over anybody's beliefs or tell anybody, well, no, my beliefs are, this is what I believe. I do believe that you do face a certain type of judgment. There is a possibility, I wouldn't rule it out, that there's a possibility you could possibly linger and choose not to move on because you didn't want to. Kind of thing. I talked to my older brother about this, and he actually tells me, no, there isn't any ghost. You go on to judgment. And I'm like, well, would there be a possibility though that you kind of reject kind of crossing over, and you linger, you stay until such time where you actually choose, okay, it's time for me to move on, or this is not my place anymore, kind of thing. But I don't believe that there's nothing beyond this. There's no way. I don't think for a second that if I died tomorrow, that would just be the end of Jeremy West, and nothing else would follow after that. So yeah, I definitely believe that there's something more out there. And I definitely believe it reminds us that every time, when we see these things and experience these things, these things are real to me. I absolutely believe in the paranormal. I believe in angels and demons and spirits and different other phenomenon and whatnot that may be interdimensional. I don't know everything. I try to do my homework and I learn new things every day, like the elemental thing. I honestly, I think I might have briefly heard about that at one point in time, but it just didn't kind of stick with me as, something else like Mothman or something like that would stick with me. Yeah. Anyway, not to go trail off subject or anything like that.
Well, Jeremy, I got a question for you, okay? And it may hit a little hard, but I'm sure this is on the mind. Okay. I'm sure this is on the mind of many people listening tonight, okay? Now, being in the military, you obviously have guts and courage and a fierce, strong attitude. But do you get scared when you're dealing with the paranormal?
Oh, yeah. I mean, because it's, you know, you get concerned because it's something that you know that isn't a normal, isn't a human being that you can, you know, predict what they're going to do kind of thing. You know, that's the thing about dealing with this phenomenon. It's so unpredictable, and it's so, you know, it's called the unexplained for a reason. You know, you don't know what its next move is going to be. So that it's always that uncertainty that really kind of concerns me a little bit. I live in Akron, Ohio right now with my wife, and we live literally 35 miles away. I know you guys have been to Mansfield Reformatory before. We live 35 miles away from Mansfield Reformatory. I've been there 5 times since I've lived here in the past 2 years. And just about every time that I go over there, you know, I kind of prepare myself, okay, when you go in there, you know, it's notorious for this activity. Do not be, you know, don't be surprised if you see this. You've seen this stuff before. You know, you just got to kind of deal with it. You know, don't provoke it or anything like that. Don't be disrespectful. You know, just kind of, you know, walk along and, you know, kind of say your piece and be extremely respectful and, you know, have a good time. You know, while you're there, you know, but you know, just remember that this is stuff it's beyond you kind of thing. You know, it's beyond your comprehension, and it's very unpredictable. And you don't want anything following you home. You don't want anything to cause any type of harm to you or you know, affect you negatively while you're there. You know, because that's their home. That's where they dwell. That's not your home. That's not, you know, you're a guest. So you just kind of mind your P's and Q's, have a good time, but, you know, you need to be good. So.
Well, you know what? Since, you know, with all these experiences and the more that you have your views changed on the paranormal due to those experiences? Have they gotten stronger, or have they left you with more questions?
Well, yeah, you're always left with more questions. I mean, the deeper you go, the more questions that you have. You know, you want to know more about different phenomenon and such. Did it change my views on the paranormal? The more stuff that I experienced, yeah, absolutely, it has. You know, like I said before, that incident that happened to me when I was 7 years old, I wrote that off. But it was kind of like that thing that you just kind of say, that didn't happen, but you know in the back of your mind, yeah, it did, dude. You know that it did. Stop denying it. And I kind of, I've been able to actually talk about that thing and some of the other stuff a little bit more easily, and instead of just kind of keeping it bottled up and just say, well, don't tell anybody you saw that. They'll think they'll think you're crazy. You know, it's really kind of opened me up. Not just the paranormal experiences, life experiences in certain situations that I was in the military as well. You know, when you're in situations where it's life or death, you know, it's no game. It's, you know, you got to have your head on a swivel. You got to, you know, got to stay focused. It's people's lives that are at stake. You know, that brings you closer and gives you a more perspective on, you know, not just the paranormal, but just life in general. You know, that really kind of makes you think a little bit more. Hey, it's a big world out there, and a lot of stuff goes on, and you know, you really need to kind of be respectful and try to learn as much as you possibly can. And but yeah, as far as the questions go, yeah, the farther down the rabbit hole you go, to me, the farther down the rabbit hole you go, the more questions you got. You know, it's like an addiction.
Well, we talked about this a little bit earlier on in the interview, media and television. What are your thoughts on paranormal reality TV? Do you think it's hurting the field or corrupting the minds of its viewers?
Oh, you know what, Anthony, you know what? It started off not. It actually probably kind of started off not doing it, but it's getting to a point. You guys had a show. I listened to a show that you guys had. it was right after Halloween, and you guys talked about the same thing. And I remember I was driving home from work when I listened to it, and I was like, yeah, that's what I was thinking, and to an extent, it's really kind of it's sensationalizing it a lot, and it's really kind of, to a point, it's being disrespectful. You talked on the show time about how you were at I think it was Bobby Mackey's, and you had an individual that was with you that kept saying, I want somebody to rape me. You know,
yes,
we did. Why in the hell would you think that? You know, what is the matter with you? You know, and not only that, that's not only opening. If you really do believe in that kind of stuff, or if you're just putting on a show for, you know, the girl that, you know, the hot girl that's with you or whatever. Hey, you know, look at me, I'm a badass walking through here. I'm challenging the spirits and all that. You know, you're not being a badass. You're being an idiot. You know, and you're being extremely respectful. And like I just got through talking about, when you go into these places and you want to learn, go there to learn. Don't go there to try to, you know, bombard the situation with, oh, you know, hey, I'm this big, you know, bad kind of, you know, paranormal investigator and all this kind of stuff. And, you know, this is, you know, I've been to this place and been through this and this, that, and the other. And don't be that guy. Just be the guy that goes in there and acts respectful and does his research, you know, and comes to conclusions based on that research, you know. I think to an extent it's really kind of getting a little bit out of hand. I watch these shows all the time. I watch all the shows on Destination America. You know what my favorite show on Destination America is, though, guys?
What?
Hillbilly Blood. Have you ever watched that show?
No.
Hillbilly
I'm
Blood.
not familiar with that one.
No, it's not about the paranormal. It's about two guys that live up in the Appalachian Mountains, and they're kind of like mountaineers, and they make all kinds of cool inventions. All that. That's actually my favorite show on that channel. But no, I watch those shows like Mountain Monsters and all that, and I'm just like, really? Come on, guys, you know, you know, it's really kind of getting. Yeah,
Jeremy, I have to add something. I just checked our Facebook page, and Nathan actually made a comment yesterday on the show. He mentioned that he at the picture that you were talking about at the morgue in Qatar, and he says that Jeremy used to dare me to go inside, but all I was willing to do was stick my camera inside and snap a quick picture.
Oh, no, I didn't dare. That was all his idea. He was all, no, we got to go check it out. And I was just kind of like, okay, well, you go. If I did do anything, I did tell him, okay, well, you go first kind of thing, you know.
Right.
We didn't just stick his camera inside there and snap a picture. No, he walked in there with me. He was standing right next to me the entire time. So, yeah, Nathan's a great guy. He's a good character. He's an awesome friend. And that's the thing about the military and stuff, and making the kind of friends that you make over there. You know, these are guys and girls that you know, they're with you your entire life. And to me, the camaraderie and the brotherhood and all that, the stuff that you see it on television or you read it in the books, you know, like, you know, Band of Brothers and Lone Survivor and all that. You know, that stuff is real. That stuff is absolutely real, and that. To me, that in and of itself is a powerful phenomenon right there, and it's such an experience to have that and be a part of that and be a part of that family. It's definitely something that it stays with you your entire life. You know, I still, you know, I consider myself still security forces. Now I'm retired. You know, I got a pension coming in and all that, and I still consider myself an SF. You know, one of the things that we do on Facebook, kind of one of the things that I dread on Facebook whenever I check it is, you know, most of my friends are either security forces or former security forces. And one of the things that I kind of dread when I pull up my Facebook is I see profile pictures that turned into badges with the black band across it, meaning that we basically lost someone. And that's something I dread seeing every day. And, you know, sometimes I do, and I'm just like, oh, gosh, you know, and you try to find out, okay, what happened, who was it, you know, and try to find out if it was somebody that was close to you, and you know, even if it wasn't somebody that, even if it was somebody you knew vaguely or didn't know at all, it still really, really hits you heavy because that's that's your family. That's my family, and I've lost a total of seven friends since we began the global war on terrorism. 7 people that were friends of mine that are no longer with us, and I think about them along with everyone else every day I wake up, and it's not it wasn't exclusive just to security forces either. I've got friends that are I got a really good buddy of mine that was an Army MP that was stationed up in Alaska with me, and I still talk with him all the time, and he feels the same way. But that to me in and of itself is a phenomenon, and it's a very powerful one, and it's something that really changes your life and affects you.
It's a spiritual bond.
Do our job. Yeah, it is. It absolutely is a spiritual bond.
Well, you know what, Jeremy? This was a great discussion. We're so glad that you reached out to us. Is there anything that you're doing now to further the paranormal field, possibly, maybe writing a book or creating a site online for other military men and women regarding the paranormal?
I actually am. I got 2 manuscripts I'm currently working on. One is actually a fictional piece that I wrote. I got an idea about, I don't want to give too many details of it, but I got an idea about a book. My wife and I went to this club in Alaska when we were stationed up there, and I just they had this masquerade ball that was going on there when we went to this club, and it really this idea popped into my head. What if there were a bunch of ghosts that were kind of lingering, haunting this type of tavern kind of thing? And I thought, that's a good idea for a book, and I my wife and I started putting it together one night, and that's still something I'm trying to piece together. And I got some other friends. Right before I retired, I was talking to one of my supervisors and going over all my deployments and such. And it's a real bummer. You see all these books written about the Army and the Navy and all this kind of stuff, and nobody really writes about security forces. And we definitely have a story to tell. And I was like, well, maybe I'll do that. Maybe I'll do that when I retire. And he said, yeah, you should definitely do that, man. And he says, I've been calling, certain friends and contacting them. Hey, do you remember when we were at this location? I'm kind of, trying to piece together all the details. I can't really remember okay, that's what happened. All right, and just kind of putting that down, typing it, trying to type it out. It is extraordinarily hard to try to put something in writing that you really kind of don't want to think about. You'll never forget it. You really won't, but you don't want to think about, the bad times, And that's a lot of what a lot of people, when they talk to me and they find out I'm a veteran and that I've been to Iraq and all that, they kind of want to talk about the bad times. They kind of want to talk about, what was it like when we were, in this war zone and that, and, did you lose any people and this, that, and the other, and it's one of those things where you're like, okay, well, I know you don't really kind of understand where I'm coming from. I don't necessarily want to talk about the bad times. I want to talk about the good things that we were able to do. We helped a lot of people, and we did a lot of good stuff when we were, while I was serving, and I served with a really awesome group of individuals, and there's no other people like them in the whole world. And I'd rather talk about that than the bad things that that are going on. But it does kind of make you want. You still get that drive to, I need to tell the story. I want to tell the story. It's going to be hard for me to tell the story, but I still want to tell the story and give it give these guys the respect that they deserve. By telling the story and by being accurate in telling the story as well. So, I do got another manuscript that I'm trying to put together. I haven't thought of a name for it yet, and I haven't really even kind of thought of a timeline yet for it. It's just kind of stuff that's coming to me, and I'm kind of putting down, and I'm trying to, like a puzzle, I'm trying to piece together. So.
Well, you know what, Jeremy? Where can our listeners go to learn more about you, or just to stop by and say hi?
Well, yeah, you can find me. I'm on Facebook. It's. I'm not even sure exactly what my, if you want to email me, if that's cool, my email's woodstock.77@hotmail.com. Woodstock is a nickname that I had in the military, by the way. Not Woodstock like the hippies and all that. Woodstock was the little yellow bird in Charlie Brown.
Snoopy.
Yeah. Well, the reason for that is one of my training instructors kind of called me that. Now I'm a little guy. I'm not this big strapping dude that you see on these shows. I'm a little guy. I'm a short. I'm 5'6" and 160 pounds, and I look kind of out of place. I kind of look like the little yellow bird. With all these big shoulders and all that. And that's kind of where that nickname kind of came in. I got several other nicknames that I won't get into that, but that's the one thing. Everybody's got a nickname or two. So, but
right.
Anyway, they can find me on Facebook if they want to, hit me up and be like, hey, what do you think about this, and whatnot. Now, I'm a very open individual. I got a lot of time on my hands, now that I'm retired and whatnot. And yeah, I'd very much like to talk to more people. That's one of the reasons why I so wanted to come on this show. I wanted to talk to other people that are very much interested in the field of the paranormal and whatnot, and kind of get other perspectives and learn new things like this elemental thing like that. That's, like I said, that's one of the first times I've heard about that, and I'm always up for learning new things. I just started going into the realm of podcast recently, and you guys got some friends that were on a show, your Mothman episode, and I've been checking out their podcast called The Whatcast. And those guys are absolutely hilarious. It is like, I enjoy listening to their show way more than I do watching any of those shows on Destination America. You guys and The Whatcast. One of the reasons why I love those guys is, they go into the cryptids and all that, and I really like to talk about the cryptids and stuff, and they talk about stuff that I'd never even heard of, like some, I think the other night they were talking about a frogman. I'm like, what? No, I haven't heard about that, But no, that's always kind of interested me, and I love their show. They talk about the paranormal, and they're very knowledgeable, but they throw in that comic relief, and you're just, it kind of makes you not so much creeped out when you got two guys that are, they'll joke about it, but then they'll be serious and such. And I learned that there's definitely two things that both of those guys hate, and that's the band Nickelback and barn owls.
Yes.
Everything. So that's going to kind of stick with me. People are going to be, what do you think about the Amityville house? And I'll be like, well, you know what? That's a giant barn owl. It's still by the eyes. And so I love that show. That show's awesome. But I really like to get on and have a chat with those guys. So.
Well, you never know.
We
that
can make
might
it happen.
Because we can make that happen. Well, Jeremy, we want to thank you for a wonderful interview. And you know what? We hope you did enjoy it as much as we did. And we'd love to have you back on in the future.
Oh,
okay?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Lucy and Anthony. I really appreciate you guys calling me tonight and including me in on this. I probably got a lot of comments and a lot of emails waiting for me. So, a couple of guys told me that, well, dude, you got to talk about this and you got to talk about that. And I'm like, well, dude, it's only so much time. A lot of weird stuff has happened, but I got to really kind of emphasize on the really, really weird things that, that kind of happened. And, I know they're going to want to talk about that, but I won't take up all you guys' time. I really appreciate you guys having me on tonight.
No, we loved having you on, Jeremy. And, like you said, there's only so much time that we have. So definitely we would love to have you back on. Either if it's before you even publish your book, maybe we can have you on to talk about and finish maybe some of these stories. We get to talk about Saudi Arabia and Florida and such. And so maybe we'll have you come back on in a few weeks and we can continue this conversation. But thank you so much for coming on.
Awesome.
We really did enjoy it, and I hope our listeners did as well. From the feedback that we're getting in chat and some of the messages that we're getting, they love you and they love the stories. So thank you, Jeremy, for coming on. And have a great holiday and a Happy New Year.
Yes. Merry Christmas to both of you guys, and God bless both of you. I really appreciate you guys having me. Thank you so much again.
Thank you.
Thank
God bless
you.
and Merry Christmas to you. All righty.
All right. Good night, guys.
Good night. Like I said before, when Jeremy had sent us the email, I was really fascinated with the idea of talking about paranormal stories in the military. I mean, you sort of hear them I mentioned this earlier, when you talk about military and government and paranormal, you think of the sort of things that are confidentially put down in files somewhere, where the government and the military are doing some sort of experiment, or either it's remote viewing or some sort of hypnotic trance that they're putting experimentees in the military to do some sort of covert operation or whatever. But you don't really hear the paranormal, the ghostly, the haunted stories that happen in the military, in the barracks, maybe even on the battlefield. And when Jeremy had sent us the email, talking about coming on the show, it really intrigued me, because one, I had never heard about it, and two, I think it's always good because whenever we do have a guest on, even if it's for two people that the story or the topic connects with, maybe with Jeremy's story tonight, that there's two other military or three other military men or women that are out there that may have had the same experience but haven't had the courage enough to talk about it, or to even come to the full realization that what they did see is maybe paranormal. And hearing Jeremy tonight, maybe that sort of clicked with them. And that's why we do this show, so that there is that connection between people, that communication, that relationship, that word that Jeremy likes to use, that relationship between people and between everyday people. And, his stories were fascinating. There's a couple of stories that we didn't get to tonight, but we'll definitely have him back on. But what he spoke about tonight, I think, resonates not just because it's within the military. I mean, it's common experiences that a lot of people in the paranormal have had. I just find it really interesting to see if there's a difference and why it is, why it's happening within military bases. Is it because of the trauma that happens there naturally because of war and battle? Or is it, again, what we talk about? Is it the land? Is it the religious history and the human history that's of the land and the area? So if it's Qatar, if it's Saudi Arabia, or if it's here in the States, does it have anything to do with that? It's a good topic to bring up and discuss and further research. But Jeremy's stories were amazing, and he was amazing to talk to.
Mhm. Well, that was it. When he reached out to us, that was the first thing I thought of. It, like these experiences that happen to someone within the military. I mean, we all know of the experiences that people have here in the States, people that have, that aren't in the military. But you're talking about places where there is death, where there's trauma. I mean, first thing I think of is Gettysburg, probably one of the most haunted locations here in the States.
I know, and you've been begging me to go there.
Yes, and we're going.
I know.
But because of everything that's happened there, this is the same kind of situation that's happening overseas. You've got trauma, you've got death, you've got all of this. There has to be, I don't believe that the energies that stay on this plane are exclusive to our country. This happens all over the world. So when I heard him mention, about the stories like in Saudi Arabia and in Qatar, those things just totally fascinated me. And again, it doesn't have anything to do with religious beliefs. It is the experience itself with that consciousness. That consciousness, it's still there, regardless of what religious belief they have or what they believed when they were here on this side. For some reason, that consciousness is still there. And those are the things that totally fascinated me. The other part is, okay, being in the military, do they think of it differently? Does a person in the military look at it differently? Do they have more of a cut and dried clinical look at it? Or does the average soldier accept it as a paranormal experience? Does your military training make that difference? Do you automatically do you push it aside and say, do you discount it as being paranormal? Does that make a difference? I don't think it does. After listening to Jeremy tonight, I think it really does, it's the same thing regardless where you are. And that's what fascinates me. Other thing too, okay, we're talking about areas that obviously are much older. They have a longer history. We talk about the land, here with all the Native American spirits and the things in the earth. You're talking about locations that are much more older than we are. What is there? That's what I'm fascinated by. What is still there? What remains there, and why? It's just opened up a whole new door for me. Again, another topic opens up a million more questions, but it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating.
Well, one of the questions that we had asked Jeremy was, as we understand it, men and women of the uniform, whether it be, local police or soldier, there's training involved in how to decipher things when you're, when you're on lookout, when you're investigating, when there is a search and rescue, when there are all these different facets that come with that position. You're trained to weed through and swim through the gray to find the black and white, to try and figure out what is the right and what is the wrong, what is the correct and incorrect. And you not so much that it's narrow tunnel vision that you have, because you are looking at everything, but things of the paranormal, which are the gray matter that I talked about, it's not it doesn't come into play when you're in that type of position. We've talked to Steve DeShavi of the Dead Files, and one of the questions I remember asking him was, when he was a police officer and a detective, did he ever believe that any of the perps or any of the cases that he had to do with the paranormal? Did he feel that any of them were possessed of some sort or had something to do with something spiritual in nature? And he said to us, no. He said, at the time he never, obviously it was never something that came into thought at that moment, because you're trained not to think in that manner. You tend to train to think in more realistic ways so that you can solve whatever it is that you're trying to solve. But I think he had mentioned that afterwards, and thinking back at some cases, sure, there could have been instances where, there was a crazed maniac. Was he high on drugs, or she was high on drugs, or was it a matter of some sort of, evil, demonic, bad entity type of possession or oppression of some sort? And he doesn't know that. But, it is it's an interesting area to discuss and talk about, because of that juxtaposition to how the military view the world in itself. And when you have that mindset, how does the paranormal play into it? How does it sit within your mind so that it's almost like creating a switch in your brain that you have to, or do you, the question is, do you become just a military soldier at one point and then switch over and then have this belief in the paranormal? Can you have both? And that's why this really interested me to sort of talk about it and bring up, because I don't know how that works. I'm not familiar. I've not been in the military, so I don't know how that operates. And just from the little conversation that we've had with Jeremy, I can see that he has this balance of the two. But how does that operate? How does that work? And coming out of the military, being a retired security force, does he take any of those training abilities into, when he's mentioned he's gone to Mansfield Reformatory, 5 times already now, does he take any of those training attributes, those abilities and those gifts that he received being in the military, does he take that while he enters a haunted location? I kind of think that kind of helps a heck of a lot more, I think. I don't know about you. If having that training, it's you are an investigator. As security forces, that is you're a police. That is your job. And so that mindset now is already there, embedded in you. So utilizing those abilities and being within the paranormal and being an investigator, say, at a haunted location, I think can only enhance your experience and your results in your research, tenfold.
No, I agree, because a person like that is trained to look at every detail to find the answer to what happened is definitely going to, it's no different. You're looking at a location and you're looking at an occurrence and you're trying to discover what caused this occurrence. So therefore, the military training, the police training is going to help you look for more answers. Instead of like me, I run in and it's like, oh, everything's a ghost. Where someone that's more like you, that is more fact-based. They want to know the facts. They want to know the reasons. So I think they are going to tend to kind of maybe get to that answer quicker than maybe I will. I rely totally on feelings, and things like that. I think a person in the military, somebody with that kind of training, is definitely going to look at more things. They're going to eliminate all the non-paranormal things first, and then what you're left with may be a more true vision of what it really is. So yeah, I think I agree. I agree totally.
One of the things that I picked up on early on in our interview with Jeremy, and I hope he doesn't mind me talking about this, but one of the things that I picked up on when he was describing and talking about his early experience when he was a child in his bedroom and seeing that dark shadow figure with the bald head and the ears and the shoulders and everything, as he was talking about it, he did mention towards the end that he had his older brother, I think it was, would talk to him and read to him from this book about Mothman. And as he was talking about it, something clicked in my head, and I said, maybe the conversations and the visuals that he created while his brother was reading him the book, or if he was reading the book about Mothman, somehow may have, unconsciously or subconsciously created this image of what he saw. I'm not saying that his experience as a child is false or anything, but I'm saying, could that have contributed to the fact that he saw something? There's many times, especially with children, but I know many adults that this happens to, when they go see a horror movie and, they go home or whatever it is, they get frightened. They think that they've seen, if it's Freddy, if it's Jason, whoever it is from the movie, they sort of see it within their home, or they feel that presence around them, or they create that hype within themselves because they've just watched a horror movie. Could the idea of this Mothman book and him and his brother reading about it contributed to the fact that he visually saw this thing? Could it have been something subconsciously that happened that his mind was doing, but he was awake, and so this visual happened, but his mind created it? That could be a conversation that we have with Jeremy again to see if that is a possibility. But again, when we talk about the paranormal, I can speak for myself. I weigh things on both sides. I try and figure out whether or not there's anything that's a variable that we can figure out. Could that have been the effect of what caused it? Now, what happened in Saudi Arabia and in Nevada and Florida in his stories, I don't have a clue of what that could be. That could be what it is, something paranormal. And what he was talking about, the mist and this form cloud over and the feelings that he had, could very well be paranormal in itself. But it's worth that review, and it's worth that question just for yourself to try and figure out things. Not everything is paranormal. Not everything you see or do or feel is paranormal. There are things that contribute to the fact that you've experienced something. And so that's what I like to try and weed out, so that what we are contributing and what we are putting forward is accurate and it is true. But that's just one thing that popped in my head. I'm like, could that have been it? Could that have been something that happened that caused that experience for him?
I think all of the things that we grow up with do influence us to a point, but I think Now, his experience happened when he was a child. Now, you've seen a shadow figure. I've seen a shadow figure. And I can only relate it to my experience when I did see it. I didn't, and I can't say that maybe subconsciously. No, when I saw what I saw, I didn't go back to anything else. That there was nothing in my experience reading about it or anything that made me think, okay, maybe this is not what I'm seeing. When I saw the shadow figure, I knew what I was seeing. I was conscious of that fact. I wasn't sleepy. It wasn't, I saw it and I kind of accepted it for what it was. And it was an unknown.
And my experience,
it was a shadow figure.
Right. My experience with the shadow figure, it was, I was in an investigation, and it was with, what's his name? Zach Baggins. I was with him, and he saw the same thing that I did at the same time. So it was validated at that moment, and so I knew I wasn't going crazy. I wasn't seeing anything. There wasn't anything that would lead me to believe that my mind manifested it, because if it did, how could he have seen it as well?
Right.
I'm not saying that what I saw is actually a true form of a shadow person. It very well could have been the shadow from a tree outside the Eastern State Penitentiary windows that created it. I still don't know if it is true or not. I always have doubt. You know me. There was always this air of doubt that I have on everything, unless I have absolute proof. And what that absolute proof is, I have no idea. I don't know how we can prove what proof is within the paranormal. So that's my area, and I know your area. You were awake. You did see it. You don't take drugs, as far as I know. You don't take drugs. You don't drink. You don't do any of those things. So I know it wasn't hallucinogenic on you. So, and I'm not saying anything that Jeremy didn't see this as well. I'm throwing it into the mix. I'm thinking, could that have been the cause of it? And it's just what it is what I'm trying to do is when people are having these experiences, to also think of what has led up to it. What was the contributing events or factors that led up to that experience that could possibly explain it, so that we push it aside and say, okay, maybe that wasn't so much paranormal, but you know what, this was, and here's why, and get into those factors, because I don't know why, but I know there's a lot of people that are just putting forward crap stories about the paranormal. And I don't want to get into the fact that, we already have a bad rap anyway, and outsiders don't, when I say outsiders, it's people who are not in the paranormal field. They think we're nuts and crazies and morons and idiots and, whatever. And so I want to try and not educate, because I'm not going to pontificate and stand on a soapbox here, but I just want to get everybody in the notion to think about what it is that they've just experienced, and if there's anything that led up to it that could possibly explain it, whether it is mechanical in nature, if pipes were water pipes or whatever it was, or if you just watched a movie about something that is similar to that. Think about those things and see if there is that connection, so that we weed out those stories where people on the outside don't come to us and say, you know what, you're full of crap because you did this, you did this, you did this, and that's why you saw that. That's all.
Okay, but see, one thing that just now popped into my head, and Jeremy mentioned it, he says a lot of the experiences that he was with someone else. You had your experience, you saw this shadow person, you were with another person, which leads me back to the other thought of do we as human beings, can we do this group consciousness that makes everyone see? Do we have this energy that we're focusing on something that we think we're seeing, and for some reason does a person within our little range, our little area, are they picking up on what we're thinking? I mean, is this like this, like the tulpas, that we create this entity or whatever being is? Is this something that we are creating in our own minds? And is that energy being transferred, or is another person near us picking up on that same energy, and therefore we're both seeing the same thing? We're having the same experience. Is that another thing that could be happening? These are all other questions that I have.
You're opening up a huge golden door that I don't think you want to open up at this point, because you're going to get into conversations about consciousness and how consciousness is linked to other consciousnesses. Like my consciousness is linked to your consciousness. It's linked to every bit of consciousness that's in this world. So we can share experiences that way, and they can be, that reality can be created by us, because you know, I don't want to get into matrix kind of thing, but you know, the reality that we see is the reality that our consciousness has created for us to formulate. You know, the idea that that tree in the woods is there only when we're actually in the woods. Is it there when we leave the woods and go back home? People say, no, it's not, because we're not there. That reality has not been created because we are not in that realm to create that reality. Consciousness has not been able to, is not able to do that because it's creating the reality that is around our local vicinity. I don't want to get into that and discuss that, because that is a huge topic to get into. But that could be one of the reasons. There could be something to the fact that our collective consciousness can create that. You know, our collective consciousness, and we've talked about it, and people have said this many, many times, other people have talked about this, that our collective consciousness can actually create energy, create a healing energy, can create a universal vibration where it actually uplifts and creates a positive energy. I even talked about this right after, on the day of 9/11, there is this collective consciousness that was data processed, where the energies of people around the world were much higher on that day, and it could be felt, and it could be reported and calculated. So, you know, what is all about? Is it that because of that hype and that tension, did it create all of that unseen I'm trying to think of the word, that unseen energy that surrounded the universe at that moment in time? There's a whole lot of stuff that we can get into and talk about, and a lot of people I have recently just been reading about are saying that the paranormal does not really exist. Ghosts do not exist, that it is all manifested from our consciousness. And just like you mentioned, that my consciousness can create the vision of it and that experience, and you can share in that if your consciousness is linked up with mine, and if it is within sync with it, so that we both experience it at the same time. But our minds are creating that experience. We are creating that visual. We are creating that quote unquote material manifestation, but it's not really there. It's because we're creating it ourselves. So there's a whole lot of areas that we can get into and talk about. Maybe that is another topic that we discuss in the future. But there's a whole slew of things that we just don't know.
Mhm. But there's so many questions that come up, and like I said, I mean, to me, it just popped in there. It's like, okay, with that you talk about the global consciousness. Well, is this consciousness on a much smaller scale? Is the little world just you and that other person? When two people are in a location and something happens, you know, is it possible that because you're both focused on that energy, are we manifesting what we're seeing or hearing or experiencing? Personally, sometimes I can't subscribe to that totally, because I know when I go in a location and I feel these things, I can feel the presence. I can feel the energy of another person. I cannot see them. I cannot touch them, but I can feel them. And to me, that person is just as real as if they were standing in front of me in the flesh. So I have that question about the two people experiencing the same thing. But then again, on the other hand, I know from personal experience, I have sensed things that you haven't sensed. But then again, there's other times when we're in a location and we both feel it. We can walk into a location and feel it. But then again, I can go into a room and I know that there's someone standing right next to me where you may not be aware of that. So there's so many variables in this, so many things that we don't know, but there's so many different possibilities. And that's what keeps me going and searching for these answers.
Listen, we utilize only 10% of our brain. So to say that maybe hopefully one day in the near future we're going to understand what the paranormal is all about, I think is an unrealistic dream. I don't think that can happen. I think at this point in human existence, because we utilize so little of our brain, that we're not able to comprehend even the minutest of a particle of the paranormal to be able to expand and expound upon the idea of what the paranormal is all about, or where we go after we die. Maybe maybe it is because we're not meant to be known, and so we are limited in the amount of how much knowledge we can retain and acquire. And that's why we only utilize a small percentage of our brain. But my feeling is, if I keep fighting that fight, and if I push it up to 11% myself, that's a dream that probably will never happen. But if let's say, for instance, we push it up 1 more percent, and now we utilize 11% or 12%, how much more knowledge or how much more intelligence do we gain that we're able to understand things of a different dimension, of a different universe, of a parallel universe, of a paranormal sense? Is that something that can be gained by increasing our brain power, our brain usage? But at this point in time, it's a losing battle to try and figure out what the paranormal is all about, or to think that we would. I think we have to raise our consciousness, and hopefully at that point, maybe that would raise the amount of percentage that we utilize our brains at. And that's what this whole awakening thing is all about. And by doing so and talking about it, and brushing through these things, some people say that it's useless. Why do you even bother to talk about it? Because you're not going to get anywhere. All you do is just, regurgitate things, or you bring up more questions. So what's the sense in doing it? But I think, people say that to the scientists from 200 years ago. If nobody ever tested the chemicals and minerals and things like that, we wouldn't have the medicines that we have today. If they just said, well, that everybody gave up because it's just useless, you'll be there for hundreds of years, but by chance something could happen and answer a question at least. I'm thinking that if we at least have this debate and have this communication going, that at some point something will click. Something will open up a door. Something will increase our brain usage. Something will elevate our consciousness to the point where we may be able to understand things a little bit better. And, if that's another 1,000 years from now, then great, if the planet is still living. Or at some point we receive it as a gift from the universe, just because of, where we are at in the stage of life. I don't know.
Well, here's a question that just popped into my head. As we become more aware, and as we, as you say, increase our brain power, is it possible that the paranormal itself, the unknown, can that be evolving also? The more we find out about it, the more it's going to change. So therefore, the answers that we get are never going to totally answer what it is on the other side. Is it possible that as we evolve and become aware, could the other dimensions, could the things on the other side be constantly changing? Because part of me is thinking, okay, yeah, we were talking about different planes, we're talking about being on the other side, but it's kind of hard for me to accept that it just is the same and it's never going to change. I would think that since we're evolving on this side, wouldn't that evolution be continuing on the other side? I don't know. I may never have that answer, but that's something something in the back of my head is telling me that, yeah, things are changing on the other side just as they're changing on this side.
I think that mindset is, if you visualize Earth and our life existence in box A and the afterlife in box B, then I can understand you thinking that as we change in box A, box B changes and either elevates or morphs into something different. But consider this. We may be on a three-dimensional plane, and in box A, that is what our reality is. But in box B, I can't really describe it as box B because it's box B on top of box B, next to box B, diagonal to box B, on top of box B, below box B. There's so many different boxes. If you want to name it as dimensions or universes or whatever it is, that we can't even comprehend at this point. And so I think that there are all, because time doesn't exist, there's nothing that really pertains to what we consider what the quote-unquote afterlife is that is ruling our reality in box A. Box B has so many different holes and twists and turns and dimensions and levels and ranks that, it may not change, but it's because it has, for lack of a better terminology, so many trap doors and hidden panels that it would take, to put a time on it, it would take, let's just say 100,000 lifetimes to discover all of those different boxes. To me, that's what the afterlife is all about. It's not just a one-box figure. There's just so many different areas within that afterlife where different beings, different spirits live in different areas, quote-unquote live, reside in different areas, and can morph into different things. We even talked about this. We've got 3 minutes left, but I just wanted to say this. We talked about how, a spirit could be a Bigfoot, could be an alien, could be all of these. All of these different paranormal topics could actually be one thing. It's just morphing into all different other facets because that's what they're living at the moment. And I'm just going to leave it at that. Ponder that. Maybe research that a little bit more, you guys out there that's listening, and maybe we can talk about it and pick it up at a later time. But, Luci, why don't you get to the Fan of the Week?
Okay, this week the Paranormal Review Radio Fan of the Week is Suzanne Garza of League City, Texas. She's a member of the Paranormal Review Radio fan page. She comments on our show page, and we just want to say thank you for being a fan.
Yeah, thanks, Suzanne. And don't forget, if you want to be a Paranormal Review Radio Fan of the Week, just like us on Facebook at Paranormal Review Radio.
Well, you know what? Next Friday is Christmas Day, so that we hope that you spend it with family and friends. We're going to be taking the night off, but don't worry. We'll be back on New Year's Day with an exciting new show. In the meantime, stay tuned to our Facebook page for the promotions. We do want to thank you to everyone that we call family, all of you who listen to us each and every week. You guys are truly the best people around and are the best presents that we could ever be thankful. Anthony, thank you so much for being the creative genius that you are. This show would not be what it is without you. So, until next week, dear friends, have a wonderful, happy, and paranormal Christmas. We love you all. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Paranormal Review Radio. Paranormal Review Radio.